armed conflicts, protests, social collapse, families leaving their homes, young people confronting police, and communities asking for basic help. The crisis seems global. But is this really something new? The truth is that humanity has been through similar situations before. What changes is the setting, but what remains the same is the blind spot that refuses to change, the human ego. Maybe it's time to look more seriously at what's happening, because as long as we don't face the real causes, vanity, competition, the thirst for power, and collective contempt, we'll keep feeding the same flaws that brought us here. In various parts of the world, there are clear signs that something is wrong. Many think each crisis is an isolated case, but looking carefully, it becomes evident that this is a pattern, the same root with multiple symptoms, and that root is inside us. People are reacting to the feeling that everything has gotten out of control, but they don't know exactly where the problem started. And when frustration builds up for too long, society collapses. The question few people ask is, why do we always reach this point? Why, generation after generation, do the same mistakes repeat? Those who went through difficult periods usually remember the lessons, but their children grow up with more comfort and start ignoring them. The grandchildren don't even know what their grandparents faced, and little by little, the same mistakes reappear. This forgetting creates dangerous cycles. A family that escaped poverty through effort can return to it in 2 generations if the younger ones don't value what was learned. The same thing happens on a social scale. The strangest thing is that today we have access to more knowledge than ever before. We can study any civilization that fell because of greed, injustice, or alienation. But even so, we make the same mistakes. It's like having the answers right in front of us and choosing to ignore them, not out of ignorance, but out of pride. The illusion of technological superiority also gets in the way. Just because we have smartphones and artificial intelligence, we think we're more evolved. But basic behaviors continue: fear, ambition, competition, vanity. We changed the setting, but we didn't change inside. When we think about the fall of civilizations, we imagine external wars, but most crumbled due to internal causes: inequality, corruption, abandonment of collective responsibility. The Roman Empire didn't fall overnight. It was a slow process of deterioration. While the elites spent money on parties, the people starved. When enemies arrived, they found a society that had already fallen apart from within. On Easter Island, the collapse came from the population itself. Competing among themselves, they destroyed natural resources, killed animals, cut down all the trees. In the end, they were isolated, without food, with no way to escape. They died from choices driven by ego, not necessity. The Maya weren't destroyed by invaders. They collapsed due to internal factors: civil wars, environmental destruction, and a government that ignored the needs of the people. While the elite invested in monumental constructions, the population starved. When the conquistadors arrived, the civilization was already in ruins. This pattern repeats throughout history. Elites isolate themselves, ignore warning signs, and react too late. Today, we see something similar happening before our eyes. To understand why this repeats, we need to observe the root of the problem: the human ego, the constant need to win, dominate, and be admired. This obsession with individual superiority has caused social ruptures since the beginning of civilization. The ego always seeks more power, more money, more attention, and in this pursuit, it ignores the consequences for others. The person convinces themselves they deserve privileges and justifies their actions as if they were for the common good, even when they clearly aren't. Carl Jung summed it up well: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. As long as we don't recognize our motivations, we keep repeating destructive behaviors thinking the world is against us. Power reinforces this illusion of grandeur. Those who achieve it often start believing they're above the rules, that they deserve more than others. This mentality grows until the system collapses. The result is before everyone. We live in a world with abundant resources, but still face large-scale hunger, not due to lack of technical capacity, but because of wrong choices and inverted priorities. Billions are spent on weapons, while millions live without food or housing. Technology allows instant communication, but many communities still don't have access to clean water. It's not about inability, but negligence. Hunger directly exposes the moral failure of the collective ego. Children die from malnutrition while tons of food rot. And even facing this, many prefer not to think about it. This unequal system is maintained by a small but influential group. They control not with brute force, but with more subtle methods: distractions, narratives, and information manipulation. Today, control is more psychological than physical. This elite understood that keeping people distracted is more efficient than repressing them. While the public's attention is focused on irrelevant debates, important decisions are made without opposition. Modern control is based on division. Groups are set against each other with manufactured speeches designed to generate conflict. While everyone fights, nobody notices what happens behind the scenes. This strategy is old, but now it's applied with more sophisticated tools. George Orwell wrote, "The real power is to make people believe the lie and even love their prison." That's exactly what we see today. Many defend systems that harm them, convinced they're doing the right thing. What's most alarming is that this happens without most people noticing. People believe they're choosing on their own, but they follow paths defined by external interests. And when someone points this out, they're labeled as exaggerated or conspiratorial. Ideological division is one of the most effective weapons to keep the population under control. Two sides that hate each other are created, making any kind of unity impossible. Those in power benefit from this scenario and actively feed it. Any topic can be used to generate conflict: politics, religion, sports, customs. What's important isn't the content of the discussion, but ensuring that people choose sides and see each other as enemies. Meanwhile, the real culprits continue acting freely. Daily conflicts between neighbors, family members, and friends serve to prevent any collective organization that questions the system. Polarization eliminates dialogue. When you see the other as an enemy, there's no space for listening. Without listening, there's no solution. The only possible result is continuous conflict, which favors those who profit from instability. There's an even more effective tool than polarization: distraction. We live in an era where people's attention is constantly diverted. Social media, videos, series, games, news all the time. It's rare to find a moment of silence or reflection. And this doesn't happen by accident. It's a strategic choice. When everyone is distracted, nobody can see the real causes of problems. The excess of stimuli occupies the mental space that would be necessary to think clearly. And when there's no reflection, there's no questioning. Entertainment culture became a form of escape. Many people feel the need to always be consuming something to avoid contact with their own emptiness. Being alone in silence became uncomfortable, because that's when difficult questions arise, precisely those the system prefers to avoid. Additionally, came the culture of excessive productivity. People are expected to always be doing something, always chasing results, goals, and recognition. Any pause is seen as failure or laziness. But this constant rush prevents critical perception of one's own life. Information overload also has a negative effect. When we're bombarded with news all the time, the brain loses the ability to filter what really matters. Everything gets mixed up. Confusion sets in. Overload leads to apathy and conformism, and that's what interests those in control. The less people think, the easier they are to manipulate. The busier they are, the less they question. The more exhausted they are, the less they resist. But the most important point is that all this only works because the system exploits something that's already inside us: the human ego. Distraction, division, and rampant consumption aren't imposed by force. They're offered as bait for desires we already carry. Another problem is that even the search for meaning has been turned into merchandise. Spirituality, which could be a path of consciousness and connection, was captured by the market and converted into a product. There are promises of immediate personal growth, ready-made solutions for any emotional pain, courses that guarantee transformation in a few days. Everything is sold as a quick service, with advertising language. But wisdom isn't something you buy. It's something you build with time, effort, and real relationships. These wellness promises almost always reinforce focus on the individual. The central message is, you can be better than others, you can win, you can stand out. Little is said about empathy, community, or collective responsibility. This model doesn't just reinforce the ego, it transforms it into virtue. And the more we feed this illusion of superiority, the further we move away from the possibility of a balanced society. This generates a type of disguised arrogance. People start believing they're more evolved because they consume certain content or follow certain practices. Instead of becoming more open, they become more closed. Spirituality, in this model, stops uniting and starts isolating. The crisis, therefore, isn't technical. It's not about lack of knowledge, technology, or resources. It's a crisis of values. And at the center of this crisis is the ego, disguised as progress, masked as success, shielded by vanity. We know how to solve most current problems, but we choose not to solve them. We have conditions to feed the entire population, but we prefer to invest in weapons. We know how to treat many diseases, but we restrict access because of profit. We have clean energy alternatives, but we opt for polluting models that favor economic interests. The world could function much more balanced, but this would require a profound reorganization of priorities. It would require giving up certain privileges and rethinking what we consider progress. And many prefer to pretend the problem is too complex, when in truth what's lacking is just courage to act. The root of the crisis is in the constant choice for convenience. We opt for what's easier, not what's fairer, for what benefits the individual, not the collective. And as long as this logic is maintained, the consequences will continue to worsen. When profit is worth more than life, when competition is more valued than collaboration, and when accumulation is more important than integrity, collapse stops being a possibility and becomes just a matter of time. What's most cruel is that all this has a direct impact on people's mental health. The system affects daily life silently but devastatingly. The increase in anxiety, depression, loneliness, and burnout isn't an individual problem. It's a collective symptom. These feelings are normal responses from sensitive people living in a sick environment. They're not character flaws. They're human reactions to a hostile context. Today's loneliness doesn't come from the absence of people, but from the absence of real bonds. We're surrounded by people, but without time or energy for true listening. Each person trapped in their routine, in their obligations, without space to welcome the other. Anxiety grows when we feel something is wrong, but we can't identify exactly what. The constant sensation of urgency, of threat, that something bad is about to happen, is fed by a world that lost balance, a world guided by disconnected egos in permanent conflict. Burnout comes from trying to adapt to demands that exceed human limits. The pressure to always be available, always productive, always competitive, makes the mind and body sick. We weren't made for this pace, and when we exceed our limits for too long, we pay the price. Even amid so much confusion, there are still people who can perceive what's really happening. People who weren't dominated by distraction, who didn't let themselves be carried away by polarization, who didn't accept convenient versions of reality. But generally, these people feel alone. Those who see more clearly usually have difficulty communicating with those still trapped in illusion. It's not about superiority, but about being on different levels of perception. And this distance makes dialogue difficult. Questioning too much usually attracts rejection. Those who think outside expectations are labeled as exaggerated, negative, too theoretical. It's easier to ignore the warning than face the reality it reveals. But it's precisely these people who can point out paths. They perceive signs before others and have courage to point them out. Even without being heard, they keep trying because they understand the risk of remaining silent. Lucidity is uncomfortable. It forces re-evaluation of beliefs, review of choices, and admission that not everything works as it should. It's uncomfortable, but it's also the first step toward any real transformation. Seeing things clearly isn't pleasant, but necessary. Just as a difficult diagnosis can save a life, seeing the truth is what allows action before it's too late. More worrying than illusion is indifference. One of the greatest dangers of our time is the normalization of the absurd. People got used to seeing injustices, violence, and tragedies without reacting. The excess of stimuli reduced sensitivity. This lack of reaction weakens our humanity. When we stop caring about others' suffering, we start acting on autopilot, without empathy, without responsibility. Philosopher Hannah Arendt said, "The greatest evil is committed by people who never decide to be evil. They just stop thinking." It's not necessary to have bad intentions to cause harm. It's enough to ignore what's before your eyes. Passivity in the face of injustice spreads quickly. One ignores, another repeats the gesture, and soon, an environment forms where everything is tolerated, even what should cause repulsion. Collective silence validates what should be fought. Every time we choose not to act in the face of a wrong situation, we weaken the fabric that sustains human coexistence. And if this repeats for too long, almost no reference of right or wrong remains. Facing this, we need to think about solutions, and they won't come from above. They won't come from politicians, companies, or institutions, because no external system will change while the internal system continues being guided by selfishness, fear, and desire for superiority. Real transformation begins when someone chooses to help instead of ignore, when they decide to listen instead of criticize, when they prioritize cooperation instead of dispute, when they abandon the impulse to win and start seeing the other as part of themselves. Nobody solves all problems alone, but each attitude matters. One conscious action can inspire others, and the accumulation of these small decisions generates bigger changes. Overcoming collapse requires collective effort. Nobody saves themselves alone. When a community improves, everyone benefits. When it gets sick, everyone suffers. Taking care of others isn't just generosity, it's an intelligent way to protect yourself. Ignored problems expand. Conflicts left aside spread. Having a sense of community doesn't require thinking alike. It just requires understanding that we belong to the same space and that common well-being also affects us directly. Understanding the problem is important, but not enough. We need to act, even on a small scale. You don't need to change the entire world. Just start by not staying silent. Change begins with simple attitudes, accessible to anyone, offering help to those nearby, listening to someone with attention, sharing what's possible, refusing what's unjust, even when this causes discomfort, acting with responsibility, even on a small scale. Each conscious choice has an effect. Even if results don't appear immediately, they accumulate. And when many people do this at the same time, the collective impact is significant. You don't need to do something grand. What really matters is acting consistently, even in small gestures. Because every time someone chooses to leave the ego and move with consciousness, they weaken the cycle of collapse. Real transformations don't happen instantly. They're slow, require patience and continuity. But the firmer their roots, the more resistance they'll have in the face of difficulties. If you read this far, it's because you still believe it's worth thinking, reflecting, and trying to understand what's behind what we see. This by itself already shows there's a force inside you that didn't surrender to apathy, a consciousness that refuses to let the ego command in silence. We don't have all the answers, and that's not a problem. What really matters is asking the right questions and refusing the ready-made explanations they offer us to keep everything as is. Because as long as we accept the illusion that the problem is only out there, we'll continue being puppets of the same internal pattern that always led us to ruin. It's this willingness to question, reflect, and act that can make the difference between a future dominated by repetition of the same mistakes and a path of reconstruction based on consciousness, dignity, and real human values.